I always believed that raising a child meant teaching them right from wrong, showing them love without condition, and one day letting them walk on their own path. I gave everything I had to my son, my time, my energy, my heart. After my wife passed away, it was just the two of us, and I did what I could to be both mother and father. I worked 2 jobs for a while, missed meals just to make sure he never had to, and when he got older and more independent, I thought, maybe I did okay. Maybe he'd grown into a man I could be proud of. But what happened to me? What my own son did to me, I couldn't have imagined it in my worst nightmares. It all started when he came to me a few months ago, telling me about this business idea. He said it with fire in his eyes, the same fire I had when I was young and hungry for success. He wanted to open a logistics startup, deliveries, warehousing, technology, all the latest buzzwords. I didn't fully understand it all, but I nodded along, proud that he had ambition. He told me he needed investors. I knew what that meant. He wanted money. At first, I offered him $5,000 from my savings. It wasn't much, but it was what I could give without dipping into what I had set aside for my own needs, for the bills, for this house. He looked disappointed, but he didn't argue. He just said, "Thanks, Dad. I know you're doing your best." That sentence stayed with me. It felt off, too rehearsed, but I brushed it aside. I wanted to trust him. He was my boy. Over the next few weeks, I noticed little things. Letters started arriving in strange envelopes, legal-looking, thick paper, some with my name spelled out in full, Joseph H. Miller. That's not how most mail comes. Then one day, I saw a man standing outside the house taking pictures. When I asked him what he was doing, he said he was surveying the property for a potential buyer. I laughed, thinking he had the wrong address. "This house isn't for sale," I told him. He looked confused, checked his clipboard, and said, "You're Joseph Miller, right?" My stomach sank. That night, I asked my son directly if he knew anything about it. He was unusually calm, sat down next to me, didn't look me in the eye. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," he started. My chest tightened. He told me he had found an investor, but they wanted collateral, something that proved he was serious, something valuable. And so, without asking me, without even discussing it, he used my house, the only home I'd ever owned, the home I built with my wife, as collateral in a loan. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I couldn't speak. I stared at him, trying to read his face. Was this a joke? He must have seen the disbelief on my face because he quickly added, "Dad, it's all temporary. Once the business takes off, I'll pay it back. You'll get everything back, even more." My hands were shaking. You sold my house?" "No, not sold. Not exactly. It's a lien. Technically, it's still yours, until I default, which I won't." I stood up, walked away, sat down, stood up again. I didn't know what to do with the rage crawling up my chest. My own son had gone behind my back and put my home on the line for a business that hadn't even started. And the worst part? He didn't even look guilty. He looked like he believed this was just part of the hustle. I told him to leave. I needed space, time to think. And that night, for the first time in years, I locked my bedroom door. The next morning, I called a lawyer. The lawyer didn't even flinch when I told him what had happened. He'd heard stories like mine before. Parents blindsided by their own children, swindled in the name of dreams and ambition. But for me, this wasn't just a legal matter. This was betrayal. Personal. Deep. The kind that makes you question every decision you've ever made as a parent. We went over the documents. Turns out my son had forged my signature, not once, not casually. No, he had taken the time to study. My handwriting, copied my initials, faked dates, and even pretended to be me over the phone with a notary. It was methodical, calculated. That hurt more than anything else. Not just that he lied, but how thoroughly he planned it. The lawyer looked me in the eyes and said, We can fight this. It'll take time, and it won't be pretty. But you're not powerless. I think that's when something inside me changed. I stopped seeing myself as a victim. I wasn't just an old man betrayed by his son. I was a man with something left to fight for. I didn't confront my son right away. I didn't scream or beg. I watched. I waited. I gathered information. I tracked every movement he made, every meeting, every purchase. While I was doing that, I was also preparing. I started pulling copies of every document tied to the house, my name, my finances. I made sure I had the original deed. He hadn't. Touched that. Thank God. But I also saw just how close he was to losing everything, including dragging me down with him. His business wasn't doing well. The trucks he leased were too expensive. The warehouse deal fell through. His so-called partner bailed with half the startup money. And worst of all, he was starting to default on payments. That meant the lien he put on the house would be activated soon, and the company backing the loan could legally begin the process of claiming the property. One night, I sat across from him at the dinner table. I made steak, just like I used to, when he was a kid. He smiled like everything was normal, talking about a new delivery app he was trying to develop. I listened. I nodded, and then I said, "I know what you did, Marcus." His fork stopped midair. His face went pale. What are you talking about, Dad?" I leaned forward. "I know you forged my signature. I know you used my house. I know you lied." He didn't deny it. Not even for a second. He just stared at me, and then he sighed. "I was going to fix it," he mumbled. "I just needed time." "Time?" I said, keeping my voice steady. "You needed my life's work. You needed your mother's memories. You needed the roof over my head." That's when he tried to flip the script. He said I should be proud, that he was doing it for the family, that he was building something that would benefit both of us in the long run. I didn't buy it. This wasn't about legacy. This was about ego. "I gave you my trust," I said, trying to keep the emotion from cracking my voice. "And you used it as currency." He stood up, angry now. Said I was being dramatic, that I didn't understand how business works, that everyone takes risks, that this was no different. "No different?" I laughed, bitter. "You didn't take a risk. You gambled with someone else's chips." He stormed out that night, slammed the door. I didn't stop him. The next day, I started executing my plan. He sat there frozen like he was trying to figure out what I meant by that one word. Watch. I didn't say it out of anger. I wasn't trying to be dramatic or get the last word in some father-son argument. I said it because I meant it. He needed to see, not just hear, what it looked like when trust was broken and consequences followed. For too long, I had protected him from real consequences. As a kid, I'd clean up after his messes. In college, when he maxed out his cards, I bailed him out. Even when he dropped out after only a year and said he wanted to try something big, I supported him because I believed in giving second chances. Maybe that was the problem. I had always given, and he had always taken. Now, he would watch. What happens when the line is finally drawn? The very next morning, I met with my lawyer again. We filed for a temporary restraining order preventing any further sale or transaction related to the house. I also initiated a civil suit for damages and emotional distress. The forged documents had given us a solid case, and we had the supporting evidence. It wasn't about punishing him to be cruel. It was about making sure he never did this to anyone else again. That same week, the truck leasing company repossessed 2 of his delivery vehicles. Without those trucks, his logistics startup lost its main asset. Clients pulled out. The platform he was building couldn't fulfill orders, and word started to spread. The app he'd been promoting so heavily, the development team hadn't been paid in weeks. They walked away. Meanwhile, I contacted the bank to freeze any additional movement of funds linked to the house. It turned out he had tried to take out a second loan behind my back, using some sort of shell company. That failed, obviously. But just knowing how far he was willing to go, it still stunned me. I saw him one afternoon from across the street. He looked like a man unraveling, standing outside a coffee shop, phone in hand, yelling at someone. He wasn't wearing his fancy clothes anymore, just a hoodie and worn jeans, his shoulders hunched like they carried the weight of every lie he had told. I didn't approach him. I just watched. At night, I'd sit alone in my kitchen, looking at the empty chair where he used to sit, the one his mother used to serve his favorite pancakes at. I thought about her a lot. If she were still alive, I wonder how this would have gone. Would she have forgiven him faster than I did? Or would she have been just as broken? What made this worse wasn't just the legal trouble or the betrayal. It was the silence. He didn't call, didn't come by. No text, nothing. After that night, it was like he vanished into his shame. And part of me, God help me, missed him. Even after everything, he was still my son. But love doesn't mean blindness, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Weeks passed. The court process moved slowly but surely. My lawyer was confident the judge would nullify the forged sale. But there was one thing I hadn't prepared for. The house had already been transferred into a company's name, and the company had listed it on the market. Even though it was in legal dispute, there were buyers knocking, agents calling, and strangers showing up to take pictures from the sidewalk. It was humiliating. I had to put up signs on the front lawn. Not for sale, legal dispute. Imagine that. Living in the same house for 30 years and suddenly needing to warn people that your home isn't up for grabs because your own son sold it from underneath you. Then came the day I received a formal eviction notice from the shell company. It wasn't enforceable, not with the court injunction in place, but just reading it, seeing the printed words that ordered me out of my own home. It was like a punch to the chest. I sat in that living room, papers in my lap, wondering how things had gotten this far. My hands were shaking. I stared at the photos on the wall, my wedding picture, my son's graduation from middle school, that vacation we took to the lake, all those memories, and now this. But I didn't break. I wouldn't let myself. The next hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. That's when everything would come to light. The forged signatures, the lies, the financial trail. And that's when I made one last move. Not legally, not through the courts. Something more personal. I wrote him a letter. Not a text, not an email. A letter. I told him exactly how I felt. I told him what he had destroyed. I reminded him of all the nights I stayed up with him when he was sick. All the times I worked double shifts so he could have the things I never did. I told him that I had always loved him, but that love didn't give him a right to steal from me. And then I said something he probably didn't expect. I told him that if he showed up in court and took responsibility, real responsibility, I would consider dropping the damages suit. Not the fraud complaint, not the property reversal, but the emotional damages. I would give him one last chance to make something right. 3 days before the hearing, he came to the house again. I saw him through the window. This time, he didn't come alone. He had a woman with him, probably a legal advisor or a friend, and they both looked serious. I didn't open the door right away. I watched them. I watched him, and finally, I let them in. He didn't apologize that day, not directly, but he handed me a statement, a signed affidavit admitting the forgery, admitting the deceit. I read it in silence. Then he looked up and said, "I'll go to court. I'll tell them everything." I asked him why. Why now? After everything? He looked at the floor and said, "Because I saw what happens when I push too far, and I don't want to lose you forever." I didn't say anything for a long time. We just sat there, the three of us, in the quiet of that broken home. The courtroom was cold that morning. Not because of the temperature, there was something else in the air. That thick, heavy silence before something big happens. I sat in the first row, my hands gripping the edge of the bench. My lawyer leaned over and whispered that everything was going as expected, but none of that mattered. My eyes were fixed on one person, my son. He sat on the other side of the room, shoulders square, tie a little too tight, papers in his hand. The same hands that once held mine as a child now held the consequences of his choices. He didn't look at me, not at first. He kept staring straight ahead, like if he turned to see me, everything he was holding inside might spill out. The judge walked in. Proceedings began. My lawyer presented the case, methodically laying out each piece of the puzzle, how the house deed was forged, how the documents traced back to him, how the transaction funneled through his fake business entity. It was all right there in black and white. But facts didn't carry weight without emotion, and when my turn came to speak, I stood slowly, walked to the stand, and looked at my son for the first time in weeks. I said his name. Just his name. And he finally looked at me. I told the judge about our home. Not the property, the home. I told him about the tree in the backyard we planted when my son turned 10, the dent in the hallway where he'd crashed his toy truck 100 times, the kitchen where his mother used to sing while making breakfast. I told him about the nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home, talking to young men trying to start their lives, helping them understand things I wish my son had learned sooner. I found a quiet strength in giving, not the kind that enables, but the kind that teaches. One day, while I was organizing old boxes in the attic, I found a photo of the three of us. Me, my son, and his mother back when we first moved into the house. He must have been 5 or 6. The sun was shining behind us, her smile was wide, and he was holding both our hands like he never wanted to let go. I sat with that photo for a long time. Sometimes, I wonder if he still has photos like that. If he looks back and remembers who he used to be before money and pride clouded everything. I don't know. I can't control what he does now. But I can hope, and I can live.